You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we are right now awaiting Trump's arraignment in the Manhattan DA's case. But over in the classified documents case, the Justice Department is said to have evidence of possible Trump obstruction. So, what happened here and how big of a development is this?
Yeah, Brian, it feels like the justice snowball is gaining speed, gaining mass, gaining momentum. And just when we take our eye off of the classified documents crimes down at Mar-a-Lago to keep an eye on Donald Trump's prosecution in New York, we get a big development. So we already knew that Trump was being looked at for a number of crimes, including obstructing justice by violating a subpoena that had been issued by a grand jury investigating Trump's crimes for the return of all documents. Well, today, the Washington Post has reported that there's new information coming out of Jack Smith's investigation, courtesy of unnamed sources. And that new information involves the fact that Donald Trump, after that subpoena had been issued for the return of all classified documents, some boxes were then moved from a storage facility at Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump personally went through the boxes, and some of those classified documents ended up being retained unlawfully, which would constitute obstruction of justice, in violation of that subpoena. So, we've heard about obstruction before, but this puts some meat on the reporting bones, because if Donald Trump is personally rummaging through the boxes, putting his paws on the very classified documents that the grand jury had subpoenaed, that by law had to be returned to the federal government, boy, that is some direct evidence of Donald Trump's guilt of obstruction of justice.
Glenn, Trump was already contending with a few different possible charges in this case in particular, which include violation of the Espionage Act, unlawful retention of these documents, and obstruction of justice. So obstruction was reportedly already a part of this investigation. So how does this change things?
So, proving that Donald Trump obstructed justice, I think, was going to be a real challenge for Jack Smith. Why? Because he was going to be able to say, look, I don't put my hands on this stuff personally. I don't move boxes. I don't go through boxes. I don't look at documents. I just had my people go out and search for documents that were required to be returned under the terms of the subpoena. They returned what they returned. Maybe they failed to return some stuff. So, of course, under the bus, those people would go
Right.
in Trump world. But now, we have some factual reporting that no. Donald Trump was personally involved in rummaging through and at least inferentially, unlawfully retaining some of these documents. And that makes him guilty of obstructing justice. And it's much harder to point the fingers at others.
Now, obviously, I mentioned at the top that we're awaiting Trump's arraignment in the Manhattan DA's case. What happens if all of a sudden Jack Smith were to drop a federal indictment on Trump while he's contending with the whole Manhattan DA prosecution?
Yeah, another great question. Some more uncharted waters for sure. But let me say a couple of general rules of thumb. First of all, it's not unusual for multiple jurisdictions to be criminally investigating and even criminally prosecuting the same defendant. I mean, there are plenty of folks who are out there as a one-man crime wave going from state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, committing crimes. I've contended with that multiple times as a prosecutor. The ordinary rule of thumb is whoever charges the person first, that is the case that typically works its way through the system first. And other jurisdictions that might indict that same defendant sort of have to await the outcome of the first case, and then they kind of take the cases in order. But here's another rule of thumb. When you have a defendant who's being looked at by a state jurisdiction and by the feds will often come in and Bigfoot the case. So even if the state is the first one to bring charges, sometimes the feds will come in and, sort of exercise their pseudo supremacy. It's not really a supremacy clause issue, but their pseudo supremacy as the big dog on the block.
Yeah.
And they will sort of take that case over, and then the state will have to take a backseat. Ordinarily, I will tell you, Brian, the states are generally fine with that because on the one hand, they want to vindicate violations of their state law. On the other hand, the feds are the one with the deep pockets and the criminal justice resources that many states lack. So often the states are happy to have the feds come in, take over a case, and take the lead on a particular prosecution.
So what happens, for example, I know that we've thrown around this idea that the slap on the wrist punishment for Trump in any of these cases is that he's like sentenced to home detention. And so he just gets to continue staying at Mar-a-Lago where he stays anyway. What happens if, for example, he's sentenced to home detention in one of these state cases, in the Manhattan DA's case, and then the feds come in and that's obviously a more serious indictment and there's a more serious punishment at the end of this. Would he, and he's incarcerated at the end of this, does that then supersede that home detention that he's currently serving out because of the Manhattan case? And again, this is all, you know, just gaming this out. This is all theoretical. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen in any of these cases.
Absolutely. We're theorizing, but usually incarceration takes precedent. So if somebody is serving a sentence to home detention, I can almost guarantee that if another jurisdiction sentences the same defendant to a period of incarceration, that sentence will rule. The home detention sentence will then pause unless the judges in the both involved jurisdictions sort of get together, obviously through the prosecutors and through the defense attorneys, and decide to modify the sentence so that it can run concurrently with one another, run at the same time. I could easily see that happening, but ordinarily incarceration rules and other lesser sentences like home detention would take a back seat.
Okay, got it. Well, with that said, for anybody watching, if you want to continue to stay up on this classified documents case or the Manhattan DA's case or any of the other cases that Trump is contending with right now, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.